But I do think that the next session is really, really important. Because I think if I was confronted with a disease in which I was going to die, there's a couple things that I would do. I would try to make up with the people that I've done wrong in the past. That's the first thing I would do. And the next thing I would do is I'd really hang on tight to the people I love, because I think this is really the most important part of being able to cope with this disease, and Stacy will talk about that at the end of the session. But the next thing I would be thinking about is let me get onto the internet and see what's out there. And I'm sure that these doctors or pharmaceutical companies are not talking about them because these are not money makers. And this is why they're not publicizing them. And this is why these big doctors from Boston come in and they don't talk about shark extract because there's not a lot of money in the business of shark extract. Well, no, that's not the reason why we're not giving you shark extract. The reason is because we have legitimate concerns regarding what this means. Again, we're pursuing the truth. And the more important part, and what I think Carrie is going to talk about right now, is what are the risks of actually going about taking these therapies without actually a supervised clinical setting or a true rationale. So I want everybody to welcome Carrie for her talk. And thanks, Betsy, for providing me.
Good afternoon. So I'm Carrie. I'm the lung transplant pharmacist at Brigham and Women's, and today we're going to talk a little bit about alternative therapies and compare them to clinical trials in IPF and what the difference is between the two. So for the rest of the presentation, we're going to talk about complementary and alternative medicine, and in the future we're going to refer to this as CAM. And this includes medical products and practices that are not part of standard of care. So complementary basically means that we're using it in combination with standard of care, while our alternative means in place of standard of care. So what does CAM encompass? It encompasses a whole lot of different things, such as diets, body-based therapies. This includes things such as massage, acupuncture, chiropractic practices, osteopathy, mind and body practices such as yoga, meditation, relaxation, and spirituality, naturopathy and homeopathy, energy-based therapies such as Reiki, and natural products including herbals, vitamins, minerals, probiotics, enzymes, and even sometimes animal extracts. So in 2007, they conducted a survey about what the 10 most common CAM therapies among adults were. And as you can see, there were very few people at that time who were interested in homeopathic treatment, a few more in yoga, but by and far the most common CAM therapy was natural products. And this was used by about 17.7% of all patients surveyed. So out of curiosity, can I get a raise of hands of anybody here who's used natural products? Okay, so we had a decent proportion here, probably around, again, 17% or so. So when we talk about herbal medicines and botanicals, they're often sold as dietary supplements, making them readily available. However, there's actually very little that's known about the safety of these products. And why might that be? And it's actually because manufacturers are not required to prove the safety and effectiveness of these products before putting it on the shelf. And that sounds kind of surprising. You would think that what is out there available to you has been studied and it's been proven safe, especially if it has the word natural in front of it. However, that's not always the case. So in 1994, the Dietary Supplement and Health Education Act claimed that these dietary supplements would be listed as types of food, intent to supplement the diet and not as drugs. And this included, again, vitamins, minerals, herbals, enzymes, probiotics, etc. And by doing this, it actually eliminated the requirement for the FDA to review the safety and efficacy data on these products, as long as they claim that they are not using the words diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent disease when they're marketing these products. However, they are still allowed to make statements that suggest that they have an effect on the structure or function of a body. So one really good example of this is echinacea. So most of you have probably heard of echinacea, right? And they can say that it's allowed to support the immune system, but you'll notice if you look very carefully, they never actually say that it will prevent or cure your cold. So you have to, they work really carefully on that wording, so you have to be very careful when you're reading into the claims of these products. So by doing this, passing this act, they actually place the burden, instead of on the manufacturers to prove that it's effective and safe, on the FDA to prove that the products are unsafe. And it does occasionally happen that unsafe products do make it to the market. So perhaps you'll remember ephedra or Ma Wong. It was initially approved, well, not approved, I should not say approved. It initially came to the market as a weight loss medication and a stimulant medication. And after being on the market for a while, they found that people were having strokes, they were having heart attacks, they were dying, and eventually that product became banned in the US. So natural does not always mean safe. So how does this compare to pharmaceutical drug manufacturing? It's actually very distinctly different from what is required of over-the-counter and prescription medications. These medications are run through many tests and clinical trials to demonstrate that they're both safe and effective before they make their way to the shelf. So in order to bridge the gap between prescription products and over-the-counter products, the National Institutes of Health created the National Center for Complementary and Alternative Therapy in 1992. And this was to help, their mission was to apply rigorous scientific standards to evaluate CAM therapies. And they are doing this, and they're doing an excellent job. However, the speed to which these herbal products are coming out cannot keep up with the way that the National Center is able to study these products. So there is excellent information that they have gathered on these products. However, there's still very much that is unknown. So what are our main concerns with these types of products? So I want you to think of these herbal products the same way you would think of your prescription products. Now, if you've picked up a prescription, you'll notice when you get it from the pharmacy, it comes with a pamphlet that tells you exactly what to watch for that product. And if you've ever read through all the details, there's probably about 100 different side effects that you should be watching for with each new medication that you take. And you should really think of all your herbal supplements the same way. The unfortunate part is because they have not been studied as well, we don't have that pamphlet that comes with it that says what to watch for. But just like all your prescription products, they can have drug interactions, they can interact with other herbals, they can interact with your prescription meds, and this could cause your prescription meds to be less effective or to have more side effects from them. The effectiveness of these products has not been well studied, and you'll notice that disclaimer on many of the herbal products websites. And even if they have been studied, they've been studied on how they affect the body, not in the specific disease state that they are being marketed for. All of these products have side effects, and some of them, because they have not been well studied, are not known. So it's hard to know what to watch for when you take these products. And product contamination is always another concern. So I want you to think of the risk and the benefit when you're taking these herbal products. Is the possibility of an unknown benefit worth the cost of both the side effects as well as the monetary cost? So that study that they conducted that showed that 17% of patients were using herbal products, that actually led to about $15 billion worth of costs in herbal products in a year. So it's quite a lot of money going into herbal products. So when I was given the opportunity to give this talk, I thought a good way to look at what was marketed for IPF would be to go online, just as most patients would, to see what's out there. And I came up with a whole slew of products that are being marketed as having suggested benefit in IPF. And as a pharmacist, I have to be honest, I've never heard of half of these. So there's a lot of things out there that are being marketed that we really don't know what their effects are. So for example, if you were to pull these up on a website, they're offered to have good suggestions for how to help IPF. And they'll tell you how some of the products work. So serapeptase is one that came up quite a few times, and I believe there was a question about that earlier. And this is marketed to thin mucus so that it can be coughed out and reduce inflammation. It says that it will have a calming effect on the immune system, by using an enzyme that breaks down protein. However, when I tried to find scientific information about this product, there was very little that had been actually studied in pulmonary fibrosis. And the same thing goes with a lot of these other products that are being marketed for pulmonary fibrosis. So again, we talked about side effects. So I think it's important when you're trying these herbal products to really research them and find out what potential side effects are. So these specific products that are being marketed, there are concerns and they do have side effects. So for example, licorice is actually contraindicated for those that have very high blood pressure because it can increase your blood pressure further. Also, when used in combination with diuretics and steroids, it can decrease your potassium, which can lead to heart rhythm problems. Serapeptase and hemp oil can thin the blood. So for the person who mentioned that they were on blood thinners earlier, it would be a bad idea to take this in combination with your blood thinners due to increased risk for bleeding and bruising. I also found a case report with serapeptase that it can actually cause an interstitial type of pneumonia, which would not be good in our pulmonary fibrosis patients. Ginseng is marketed as being a stimulant agent. However, one of the side effects of many stimulants is that it causes trouble sleeping. Suna is noted to have estrogenic properties, and Nepronol recommends caution in smokers due to increased risk of cough and phlegm. There's also another one on the previous slide called colloid silver, and I found that there's actually no scientific use for this in any type of disease state, and it has very serious side effects which cause a bluish-grayish discoloration of the skin, which is irreversible. So I think if you're thinking of taking any of these products, I would really recommend that you try to research them a little further before you start taking them. So moving on to the drug approval phase and how things differ in prescription and over-the-counter drug manufacturing as opposed to herbal manufacturing. I think you've probably seen this slide about 4 times today, but we'll talk about it a little bit more. So phase 1 studies, after a new drug makes it to the FDA, they put an application in, and then there's a very small study using healthy individuals, about 20 to 100 people, and they do phase 1 studies to look at safety and side effects of medications. Now, if we were to talk about the odds of a drug making it to market, only about 20% of drugs that go through a phase 1 study will make it to market. If it makes it through a phase 1 study, it goes on to a phase 2 study, and this looks at the efficacy of the drug. This includes about several hundred patients, and they usually have the disease in question that we're studying the drug for. Now with this phase, about 30% of these drugs will make it to market. Moving on to phase 3 studies, we have the population-based studies, which are much larger. They include several thousands of patients. And sometimes these will include the randomized control studies that Betsy talked about earlier. About 60% of these studies will make it to market. If it makes it through the phase 3 study, it will get filed with the FDA. About 90% of these drugs filed with the FDA will make it to market. It then requires the manufacturer to create the drug and bring it to market. And even after drugs are marketed, we still follow studies and post-marketing reports about side effects with the drugs. So what has been studied in pulmonary fibrosis? You've heard things from our speakers earlier: prescription medications, azathioprine, prednisone, pirfenidone, and acetylcysteine. And none of these seem to have great therapeutic effects in IPF from what we've heard from our previous speakers. But we have learned important information from our clinical trials. So outside the US, clinical trials have shown that pirfenidone may slow lung decline. And because of that, it's now being studied in the US and may be an option soon if it makes it all the way through its phase 3 studies and through the FDA approval process. And acetylcysteine and azathioprine have shown some benefit. Outside the US, there was actually a study that included azathioprine, prednisone, and N-acetylcysteine outside the the US that showed benefit, but there was concern that this study did not have a placebo arm. So that led us to the Panther trial, which was mentioned earlier. And this was the study where they actually stopped the arm of the trial early that included the 3-drug regimen of prednisone, azathioprine, and N-acetylcysteine because there was increased risk of hospitalizations and mortality with this arm. So we know now that using these drugs in combination is not really recommended. And hopefully we'll have the results of the remaining arms of the study soon. So we've talked about a lot of things, and what can you do now? So a lot of these are standard of care things that your physician has probably already mentioned. Stop smoking is pretty obvious. Eat well. As Dr. Rosas just mentioned, we should eat our broccoli. You want to stay up to date on your vaccines, especially the pneumonia vaccine. And right now we're heading into flu season, so hopefully you've all gotten your flu vaccines. Exercise and pulmonary rehab have been stressed throughout the day. Staying away from people who have infections. And if you want to consider something above and beyond traditional therapies, what can you do? So I think it's important to consider enrolling in a clinical trial so that we can gather good data on what works and what doesn't. You can consider doing other CAM therapies, yoga, meditation, relaxation. And if you are going to use natural products, I really recommend that you do a little research. Talk with your doctor, make sure that they know that you're using something herbal so that they can look for drug interactions. And if you want to find a little more information about these products, I would recommend looking at these following websites. So the National Center for Complementary and Alternative Medicine has a list of the medicines that they've studied and the side effects that they have found with these drugs. Also, Medline and the Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation have information. Are there any questions?
Well, sure, there has to be questions.
Yeah, the same question earlier, which was on pirfenidone and Seroquel, which were both recommended to me because they somehow thinking those two drugs help with the scar tissue, dissipating the scar tissue. And my big question is, with that harmony, not that I'm expecting you to...
Was it Seroquel or serapeptase?
Well, I had one. Well, I had one was serapeptase. You already mentioned that one.
Right.
The other one was
Pirfenidone.
and the other one was Seroquel NK, which was specifically designed for pulmonary fibrosis.
I think it's a little hard to know because some of those ones that you've mentioned are, fall in this category of natural products that we don't have good information about. So I don't know offhand about that last one that you mentioned, but I would recommend going and trying to find more information on the sites that we provided.
Do you have any information about, say, Native American treatment of different diseases because they've been around for thousands of years before the drug company?
Right.
Like
So,
South American sources.
unfortunately, I do not have any specific information about that. If there's a specific herbal product, again, I would recommend doing research about that so you can find out the risks and benefits of it. And I think Stacy will be talking more to us about some of the other alternative CAM therapies, such as relaxation techniques and stuff in her talk.
Yeah, you mentioned two websites for further information, the NIH, and I didn't get the second one.
Medline Plus, I believe it's listed in the pamphlet that you guys got when you came in. I think they're all on there.
When they talk about honeycombing, is that what the lung is when it has scar tissue, or what is the honeycombing?
I think I'll let Yvonne answer that one.
So the honeycombing that you see on CT scan or the honeycombing that you see in a biopsy refers to the remodeling. And so These grapes that I talked about, or that structure that Shimesh showed in my talk, is replaced by a hole. And that hole that sometimes fills with mucus, when you put many of these holes together, has the appearance of a honeycomb. And that's why we call it honeycombing. So honeycombing is a cystic or holes type of destruction in the lung. And when you put many of these together, it gives that appearance. And that's why we term it honeycombing. It doesn't seem like I answered your question.
Well, is that the same as lung scarring? Or honeycomb is different from scarring?
Yeah. So scarring is a process in which a tissue is replaced for cells that are not supposed to be there, or at least in type and number, and a significant amount of laying on the organ of some proteins that we call the matrix. And so when you were 10 years old and you scraped your knee, in order to heal that scrape, you developed a scar. And some individuals who had quote-unquote good scarring, it disappeared. People who didn't have very good scarring actually had some changes in the skin that are permanent to date. And that's aberrant scarring. So in the lungs, something similar happens. You get this insult, you get this injury, and then what there is the normal tissue is replaced by other cell types and these proteins that make the matrix. We call it the extracellular matrix. And so when these cells in the extracellular matrix interact together, they change the properties of the lung. You can no longer effectively exchange gas, and the organ becomes very, very non-compliant, like that old sponge I was telling you at the beginning of my talk. It no longer is compliant and soft as the normal lung. So the scar is an inaccurate way of describing the process, but conceptually that's what it is. Whereas the honeycombing is an actual architectural description of the changes that scarring and remodeling have on a CT scan or on a biopsy. Now it seems like now I made the trick. Right? Okay, good. Other questions?
I think that they use the term ground glass to describe my CT scan, meaning as a photography.
Yeah. All these interesting terms these pulmonologists use, huh? So ground glass opacities, what is that? So when I showed you a CT scan of a patient with IPF, I showed you that it was very classic.
Yeah.
And I said on the left side, this is a classic CT. And you don't have to know this, but to answer your question, that CT scan does not have ground glass opacity.
Well, that was the appearance.
Correct. Whereas on the right-hand side, I showed you a CT scan that didn't look as sharp, looked kind of hazy.
Yeah.
That's ground glass opacities. Okay, so that haziness, and again, I don't actually take ground glass or take glass and ground it to see if it looks like that. But what they're referring to is the haziness of the CT scan. When you do biopsies of patients who have ground glass opacities, you tend to find a lot of inflammation, which is not a property of IPF. In IPF, you tend to see more scar than the recruitment of inflammatory cells. So this ground glass opacity should make any pulmonologist suspicious of the diagnosis of IPF. And for the most part, it's these patients who have ground glass opacities that go on to have biopsies to see if they have treatable forms of fibrosis. Because if I have ground glass opacities and I have inflammation and I have a CT scan and a biopsy that's not consistent with IPF, then absolutely we should use prednisone. Absolutely we should try CellCept. We should try to give an opportunity to patients to actually improve with immune suppression. If in contrast, we don't have ground glass opacities, we have predominantly honeycombing, and the biopsy is consistent with IPF, those patients, based on the clinical trials that Carrie just discussed, should not take immune suppression because the data suggests that it does more harm than good. Okay? Was that the question?
Yes.
Great.
Doctor, lung therapist advised us to use treaty. Does that sound familiar?
Treaty.
Was it
Tea tree or tree tea?
like tea tree oil?
Tea tree, there you
Tea
go.
tree oil? Unfortunately, I don't have anything specific about tea tree oil. Again, I would recommend checking out for side effects to watch for that. I don't want to tell you guys that I'm completely against herbal products. I just want you to be aware that they are not always safe and that you should look for side effects for them. So for the example of that or any others, I would recommend going online to find out what effects have been found from them to watch out for it and make sure that they don't interact with any other meds that you're taking.
But you've never heard that for treatment of the lung, any lung diseases?
Well, I did not find it for IPF when I was looking through my research, no.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So, somewhere in your book, I discovered that it said 50% of the people diagnosed with IPF were misdiagnosed. Would you say something about the second opinions that you were talking about earlier, getting a second opinion?
Yeah, I think the field has made remarkable progress in trying to identify strategies to effectively diagnose IPF. So I think there's been tremendous progress, and I think that there's an overall consensus about how we go about doing the diagnosis. Furthermore, and I was recently in a meeting a couple weeks ago that mostly focused on clinicians, there's just a tremendous amount of educated pulmonologists out there taking care of you. I mean, I'm impressed sometimes when I actually get the local referrals of how thorough and well thought the whole evaluation process is. So I have a strong confidence and trust regarding the access to care that you have. But with this said, there are a subset of cases that are very challenging to actually diagnose. And the number is not 50%. It's much less than that. And it says in these challenging cases in which the American Thoracic Society, European Respiratory Society, and Asian Pulmonary Society have guidelines suggesting that there should be a multidisciplinary approach. And what is that? When you put a group of pulmonologists, a group of pathologists, and a group of radiologists in the same room, they usually don't agree on much. But they are forced to actually come up with a consensus regarding what a diagnosis in a complex case is. And it's in that setting in which a quote-unquote second opinion is valuable. But I want to qualify this second opinion. It is a panel of experts that deal with this on a regular basis that is a second opinion worthwhile pursuing. It's not going to Joe Fisher 2 miles from Bob Frank, who has the same expertise, and telling you the same thing his colleague did. That's a very different issue, right? So again, I'm not making judgment on any particular practice or any individual regarding how it's done. What I am acknowledging is that this is a very difficult disease to deal with in some cases. And it's in that case in which you should be referred to a quote-unquote center of excellence, whatever that means. But usually what I'm looking for is a group of people who have vast experience and who can actually get together and look at a complicated case and make a determination that makes most sense for the patient. Yes? Can we get the microphone over here? So.
Okay, I'm always hoarse because of the cough. The pulmonary fibrosis, do you get those coughing episodes where you just cough and cough and cough and your oxygen goes down? Is that part of the disease?
Yes, unfortunately for some patients it is.
It's bad.
It is bad. And there's some reasonable efforts trying to look at possible therapies for this very incapacitating symptom that some patients have. You know that the results are not fantastic. There is some evidence that just plain old codeine preparations can help. There's also other preparations like Tessalon pearls, which I think is benzoate for the most part, that actually in some patients have some effect. But there's really some patients in which it's extremely refractory. And we've gotten to the extent of using medications that have significant effects like thalidomide to actually treat the cough. There's some evidence suggesting that the nerve receptors that are involved in cough are amenable to treatment by some of the medications that we actually use for neuropathies, these conditions of pain in the nerves. And Neurontin comes to mind as one of the medications that in some cases has actually been used to some effect. There are no true randomized clinical trials other than, I don't even think thalidomide was randomized, right? It was? So thalidomide was a randomized trial, but other than this, it's mostly empiric, which means that although, in the theme of the conversation that we have, although these are medications in which the side effects are known, we don't really have definitive proof that there is effective treatment. One of the things that I think is important to keep in mind as a patient when you have a lot of cough is that there's been association recently, and Dr. Al-Shamali mentioned this, of the presence of significant reflux and the progression of the disease and cough as a symptom. So again, I'm not supposed to give individual advice, but that's something that I would discuss with your doctor, is reflux potentially a cause of this, and should we go ahead and treat reflux even though we may not or do have evidence that this is part of the reason why you have the cough. But, I sympathize with the problem because I sit sometimes with patients and actually all they're doing through the clinic visit is just coughing and coughing and coughing. And I have a lot of respect for spouses who are going to sleep every day with this symptom, which is also a big problem. So, unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for this, but there are some potential benefit from the medications that we mentioned, and I'm happy to actually write them down for you or talk with your doctor about the use of these. Yes, ma'am.
Can IPF be diagnosed by a simple chest x-ray?
Do you mean by a chest x-ray the old films that we used to get for everything? Or do you mean by a chest x-ray a CT scan?
I do not mean a CT scan, I mean the old-fashioned kind.
Yeah. I would say that if somebody was brave enough to do this at this age, I would bet that person would be wrong more than half of the times. And so I don't think it's an appropriate test to make a diagnosis of IPF. And it's not my opinion, it's actually guidelines from our respiratory societies that have determined that in this day and age, with CT scanners, it makes no sense to make this diagnosis with a chest x-ray.
Yeah, I have a follow-up question. If you have IPF and you get a cold or something and all the symptoms are exacerbated, will they ever get better if the cold goes away?
That's a good question, and the term exacerbation is problematic. If you have a cold and you have IPF, there are good chances that you'll recover from your cold and everything will be back to how it was 2 weeks ago. But if you have a viral infection, and this can start as a cold, and you develop a true exacerbation, we have criteria to define an exacerbation. The prognosis is not good, and most patients actually don't recover their baseline. They have a new baseline, which is worse. And so if you stick to the term exacerbation, it's problematic. If we're talking about a common cold, I think there are good chances that good oversight, 2-3 days of symptoms, you don't need antibiotics. The third day I'm calling my doctor to make sure that I get the antibiotic, or sooner if I'm starting to notice some yellow phlegm or something that would suggest that I have an infection. But an exacerbation is a completely different thing that I won't get into, and it's a very serious condition in which the baseline has now been worsened because of either a respiratory infection or other causes.
So you have a new normal?
You have a new abnormal, correct?
Abnormal,
correct.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So, can we get the microphone over there?
Now, you were talking about coughing just a little while ago, and the gentleman earlier had spoken about phlegm. Would a lowering of the prednisone be any correlation to causing more phlegm to come up? Because in my situation, I was taking like 40 milligrams and then knocked down to 30 milligrams, and it didn't seem like I was coughing much at all, and now I'm doing a little bit more coughing, and now I'm coughing up phlegm.
Yeah, so it really depends on what disease you're dealing with. In general, fibrotic lung disorders, in general, not IPF. In general, fibrotic lung disorders, actually, cough is a good indicator of response. So if you were doing well on a higher dose of prednisone, and the prednisone is the dose is starting lowering, and prednisone is having a good effect, what I would expect is that you're having more shortness of breath as the disease is recurring. You're having more cough as the disease is recurring, which I think is the question you're asking me. Now, sputum production is very tricky. Sputum production is not a cardinal feature of fibrotic lung diseases. However, because of these honeycomb cysts, there does tend to be accumulation of mucus there. And a minority of patients with IPF, and that's not directly related to your question, but a minority of patients with IPF will actually have constant sputum production that's mostly clear. So the question you're asking me is a little bit difficult to address, but if you have a condition that responds to steroids and steroids start being tapered, I would expect the cough recurrence to be a symptom if the disease is no longer responding to the lower dose, which I think is what you're asking me. Great, well, thank you very much, Carrie.